Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Beyond the 90. Again, it's been one that we've talked about for a while. We finally have got Ant back with us. Ant, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, apart from all things Leicester City, I'm doing quite well, mate.
I kind of send the sentiment. If you've watched the previous recordings, you would have saw that same thing as well. And again, finally, last but not least, Rob back on the show. Rob, thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
Hi guys, yeah, I'm good. Obviously, the results aren't going how we all want them to go, but it's good to have the football back anyway.
Yeah, it's good to have the fullback. And kick off with a question that you'd like as well, because again, there's so many questions that we've got in terms of today and just in terms of transfers and the January transfer window.
Yeah.
So obviously, with the board and the sort of the line that's come out over the last few years has been the aim is to qualify for Europe year in, year out. With the comments at the start of the season from Brendan Rodgers basically saying 40 points as a target, has that ambition changed?
The club's ambition hasn't changed, but the reality of the situation has been their financial situation. I mean, their revenue has not grown at the same rate as their expenditure. All the new contracts that young players have had, they did spend a bit of money, a few, it feels like a long time ago now, but about 3 windows ago, they have broken that mold in terms of not selling a key asset in that window. They obviously did in this summer, so the return to that model now. That's why they've got a little bit of cash freed up now. So their ambition hadn't changed, but what the reality of the situation was, it was getting away from them. And then obviously you saw that they were on the UEFA FFP watch list as well, because obviously they were very close, or literally just overstepping the line in terms of breaching FFP UEFA. Not the Premier League. It's not the Premier League FFP that they're particularly worried about. It's more because the ambition was to keep qualifying for Europe. But then obviously the reality of the situation now is that they're nowhere near qualifying for Europe again. So it's shouldn't really be a worry. But that's why they're pushing ahead so much with the plans around the stadium, because that will generate more revenue. I mean, Leicester, in terms of the size of the club and their global reach, compared to the big six that they're aspiring to challenge year on year, it can't be measured. It's just, I mean, and they're a moving target. They're moving away as well. So as much progress as Leicester are making, the others are going away from them as well at the time. So they're desperately trying to seek new ways to increase revenue, and then they can increase spending on contracts and new signings. But I think this was just like, well, let's pump the gas before we go off a cliff here, and then rethink and reevaluate a situation. Hopefully by the time then, our revenue streams will start. But I don't think you'll see that really until they get all that project up and running at the stadium.
I mean, again, we'll have to see. And you're right. I think in terms of is a runaway, and especially with like things like the 5 sub rule as well, has really had to benefit the people at the top 6. And I think we're one of the few teams that have actually filled out that 25-man squad with all first team players rather than just academy as well. So the quantity is there. I know that Brendan Rodgers said something differently earlier, but I do want to bring in. Yeah, sorry, Rob, you're going to say.
I was going to say on that 40 points thing, the fact that he said that,
yeah.
Obviously because he's been saying for a while internally, I need more signings. This squad needs refreshing. This squad needs changing. There's certain players here that I don't trust or I don't want to play. They're not good enough. And obviously he's not been able to do that, the timing. I mean, he said today in the press conference, he's intimated something about the club's a very different club to when I first come here in terms of finances. There was money when I first come here. There's not now. So it's a different challenge. So when he says things like that in the media, that's because he's coming from his perspective that he wanted more financial backing. He wants more players coming in. He wants more changes in that squad. But the club is saying, look, we can't do it at the moment, but they can now in the next 2 windows, and they've got to in the next window, in the summer window.
Yeah, and I know I've heard you on BBC Radio Leicester recently saying about the idea of not just an evolution, we need a revolution as part of that as well, and just changing up. I do want. Sorry, before we get to it, I do want to bring up again Charlie's video. So Charlie again has come on the show a couple of times. He's got a question just on funds and what is available at the moment.
Hi Rob, Charlie here. Hope you're well. Quick question from me. I wanted to learn a bit more about the finances behind our January transfer window. Rodgers has gone from saying that we have some money to spend, saying that we have a little money to spend. I don't know how much of that is mind games and how much of that is reality. But yeah, breaking down kind of the costs, it seems that there's a lot that needs to be done, whether it's via sort of upgrading positions like the goalkeeper or centre backs, or replacing injured players like Ndidi or Ricardo, or upgrading kind of aging players like Jamie Vardy or Johnny Evans. And that's before we even start to talk about the contract situation between James Maddison and Youri Tielemans. In short, between sort of January and the summer and the following kind of transfer windows, it seems like a lot of work needs to be done, 100 million plus, at least, really, in terms of just maintaining current standards moving forwards. I know there's been well-documented bank loans that the club have taken out, and we've obviously got the money from the Fofana sale, or at least part of that as well. It'd be interesting to hear from your perspective kind of what the funds look like, and a detailed breakdown of what is actually available for the club to spend.
Yeah, well, obviously the two loans they've taken out, Mikiri's the Australian bank company. That is based on the two final parts of the Fofana money. It totals around £46 million. They won't spend all that in January. They'll spend a fraction of that in January if they can help it, because they want to keep some of that back for the big work that needs to be done next summer. Obviously, there's 7 players out of contract. They want to offer contracts to some of those. Some of those won't re-sign, like Soyuncu. He will be gone. Whether it's in this window or the next window, you won't see him much in a Leicester City shirt again. Perez, I've not heard anything on him being offered anything new. Bertrand, nothing new. I think some of the lads that will get probably offered, well, we know they're going to get offered because Brendan said it. Evans and Amate. The rest could probably just natural wastage. You've got to replace those. Then you've got the players that Brendan would like to move on that aren't out of contract, like Yannick Vestergaard. If they can get some money for him, I mean, they had a £10 million offer from Fulham in the summer, and he turned that down. He didn't want to go. Wanted to stay and fight for his place, I was told. There was a few loan offers as well, and I understand there's probably a few as well from Germany in this window as well. But Leicester didn't want a loan at the time. They wanted to regenerate money, and that's what they're going to do. But I think the reality is in the next window, they're going to have to sell an asset if they're going to carry out all the work that's required. And there was a number of positions there that were mentioned that are areas that could be strengthened and need to be strengthened. And it's the majority of the squad in certain areas that need to be strengthened. So the reality is, unless fans have to brace themselves for it, an asset will have to be sold, I think. And that most likely will be Maddison. Is the most bankable one. He will be coming into the last year of his contract. They want to renew his contract. They want him to stay, but I don't think he will. So he will be. He will probably be the one that they will try and look to cash in on and get as much as they can for, and then reinvest that in areas of the squad immediately in January. It's a left back, centre back, and a right winger that they're looking to bring in. That is the areas that he really wants to strengthen. I know there's been links with goalkeepers and centre midfield players as well, but that's dependent on outgoings. I mean, if something happened with Tielemans in this window, they've got to replace him because, you have to. They're so light in that area. I mean, Tielemans, obviously, we know he's got 6 months left to run. As far as I'm aware, nobody's come in for him in the last 4 or 5 windows. Ever since it was known that he probably wouldn't sign a new contract. There's been a lot of noise around him, but no actual offers. There's been a few inquiries, but nothing. And it's unlikely to change in this window with 6 months to go when he can go for a free at the end. So I think people will keep their powder dry on him unless they're particularly desperate.
Yeah, and again, it makes sense in terms of Tielemans, but the thing is, for me, when players tend to end their contract, they don't tend to try it. Even at the game, which wasn't great, especially in the first half against Fulham, you saw that at least he was one of the players that was trying throughout that game. And that's something that's kind of respectable as a fan. That at least the player's giving it all, even though there isn't a financial incentive after this 6 months for him to do so.
I would never question Youri Tielemans' professionalism or his desire. I know, obviously, he wants to play at a high level, wants to play Champions League, wants to play regularly in Europe at least. But I think the reason the big six sides that he probably was hoping would come in for him, the ones that could guarantee him that, the reason they haven't come in for him is Leicester's valuation was probably around the 30-odd million mark. And I probably looked at him and thought there's something missing from his game. Yeah, he's a great technician. When we saw second half against Fulham, he does make Leicester tick. He's going to be a big loss to them. But there is a part of his game that's missing, and that's that physicality. I mean, I think I've mentioned many times before, the two legs of the semi-final against Roma, the way Pellegrini did a great number on him. Pellegrini's a physical sort of midfielder, get up and down, very fast, very dynamic. And Youri couldn't really live with him on both nights, really. I mean, as soon as Leicester had the ball, Pellegrini's plan was just to sit on him, to stop them playing through him, stop the conduit. And as soon as Roma got the ball back, he broke past Youri and was running at the back four, and Youri couldn't keep up with him. So that there's an area of his game that he could work on as much as he wants, but I don't think he can, because that dynamic sort of midfield play, and that aggression isn't really there with him. But he's such a wonderful footballer on the ball. I love watching him play, and he certainly can strike a ball, can't he? We all remember that.
Yeah, exactly. We could all remember that from the FA Cup final, and it'll go down as one of the top Leicester moments in just history, genuinely. Yeah. And do you have any other questions at all?
Well, obviously we've seen quite a few different names linked in terms of left backs, and well, I'm going to specifically focus on left backs here. Is there anything with anyone that's more advanced than just links of names?
Yeah, obviously the Victor Kristiansen link, that is genuine. That I've checked that one out. That is there is something in that. They have approached Copenhagen. There's no deal been done yet. They're far apart in terms of what Leicester want to pay and what Copenhagen want to get for him. I think Copenhagen want a lot more than the 8 million that's been reported. They value him quite highly. They say there's other clubs sniffing around as well, which they hoping it would probably create some sort of an auction for him, really, which would drive up the price. So he's one of a number that Leicester would look at. I mean, Leicester never go in after and throw everything in for one target. They've always got other options that they look at as well. There'll be a number one, a number two, and a number three. And if the number one, they don't think there's value in that, or the player's a bit reluctant, or he's holding out for too much money, they'll look at number two, and then they'll look at number three. So whether he's the number one, he's very young. In fact, all the players that I've noticed that have been strongly linked, and when I say strongly linked from credible sources, they're all very, very young. And my concern is just the situation they're finding themselves in terms of a relegation battle. I just think back to the last time they were in this predicament when they went and got Robert Huth, and what a difference he made. Sometimes you need a little bit of experience, certainly in the back four. I know people said, when I've mentioned this before in articles, people have mentioned on social media, they go, well, Ryan Bertrand didn't work. Well, yeah, he didn't. You're right. But a lot of that was down to injury. So he started his life at Leicester injured, and he's just continued that way. So, that's been really, really unfortunate in the way that's turned out. But I still think they need a little bit of experience in there as well.
And I think that's what we're lacking, that kind of leadership from, especially as you were saying, from the back. And that's what, again, we were looking at. And one of the players that's obviously come in and showed that leadership quality. Again, they had a bit of a stinker at Liverpool, but obviously Wout Faes kind of epitomizes that as a young player. It's both of us a player for the future to kind of partner him. Is there anybody that we're looking at? Because Boris did mention a centre back.
Well, yeah, they're looking. I mean, I've not seen them close to anything on centre backs at the moment. I mean, the two priorities were left back and right winger. That's what Brendan initially said. Then when he was pushed, and we said, "Well, hang on, you've only got two fit centre backs at the moment." He said, "Well, yeah, perhaps a centre back as well." But I think that's dependent on finances as well. He's hopeful that Johnny Evans will come back. He's still got Soyuncu and Vestergaard, but we've seen time after time. And his plan is probably to play Ndidi there, ahead of those two. Even I think if somebody comes in for those two in this window, you'd let them both go and try and replace them. But at the moment, I've not heard them close to a centre back at the moment. It's been more left back. That's been the one where I've heard that they've made a bit of progress. They've been linked with a few right wingers as well. I mean, historically, Jeremy Boga at Atalanta, they tried to get him on the last day of the last window. And when I've spoken to people, they've said, look, this isn't a new window to us. This is just a continuation of the last window. This is the business we wanted to do before, but we didn't have the money. And then when the Fofana deal went in the day before the deadline day, that didn't give us enough time. So this is the planning has been done. It's continuation. But the problem now is availability of those players. You're more likely to find players available in the summer than you are in the January window, because clubs don't want to part with players mid-season unless they have to, or unless they want to, or unless there's players that are surplus to requirements. And Boga is at the moment. He only played a handful of games. He's I don't think he started a game this season. So that's the predicament you're in, Leicester. Do you look at it and go, and I don't believe Boga's their number one option there. There'll be others. And I see that they've been linked with, what's his name, Dango Ouattara, left-footed winger at Laurent now. That's a player that, I can imagine that it would be on their radar for the future, one they might think to develop. But whether he's the right sort of player to come in now and have an impact for the rest of the season, we'll see. I mean, I remember Riyad Mahrez coming in, and it took him a long time to get up to speed. He played understudy to Anthony Knockaert for a while, and then suddenly took off and became the player that we all know at Leicester and still remember. And they've never replaced him. And they've tried. They've had so many understudies, haven't they, come in and failed their auditions. They've had Cengiz Under, Gazelle, Diabate. I mean, Lookman was played there, all right, but I think Brendan thought he was better on the left as Harvey Barnes competition, then couldn't sign him. And ironically, it's Lookman that's keeping Boga out of the side at Atalanta. So it's been a bit of a mess, really, hasn't it, over the last few transfer windows?
Yeah, it really has. And I think there's one thing, again, it has been amazing, but hopefully with the likes of Martin Glover coming in, I know you did an article on him as well in the summer. And also one person I want to mention was the Lars Knudsen, the set piece coach. And obviously we've seen Yaya Toure leaving, going to Wigan, taking a couple of Leicester City Academy people with him as well. Is there a plan to replace the defensive coach, or is Lars coming as the long-term replacement for that defense? Because with Kolo Toure leaving, again, there was a little bit of concern, but it was a position opened up. Are they plan to fill it with somebody else, or is that Lars's position now?
No, they're not planning to replace Kolo at the moment. Perhaps long term they might, but they think they've got enough now. They've got Adam Sadler as well. They've got Chris Davis. Brendan's hands on. Lars is stepping up. He's not just doing the set pieces. He's a coach in his own right as well, and a very experienced one. So they've got enough coaches there. Mike Stauder's the goalkeepers. The backroom team's big enough. They don't want to be spending money they don't really need, that they can use elsewhere unless they really have to. And I don't think Brendan thinks he has to at the moment. So Kolo's came with him and he's done his apprenticeship. Now he's having a go at management, and perhaps in the future you might see Chris Davis do the same as well. He might move on and have a go at stab at being a number one in his own right. But then they'd look to replace them. But at the moment, I think they're well stocked in terms of coaching.
Fair enough. That's a good. Fair enough. I just thought it was a interesting question to ask. In terms of that, we've got another video just from Rich again about Soyuncu, and also again about the academy as well.
Hi Rob, thank you so much for coming on to Beyond the 90. You're an absolute great source of information. I signed up to The Athletic just for yourself, so just want to say thank you. So the two questions I've got are, if what's the mood around the camp at the moment? There's been so many conflicting stories over the last few months about, obviously with Soyuncu and Brendan Rodgers, and I just wondered whether there has been any impact with Fofana leaving, and just with the whole scenario, and what the mood is at the camp at the moment. And secondly, do you think there's any young players that are about to break into the first team? And if so, why? Is that because of lack of transfers, or is it because they're just that good? Thank you so much again.
Oh, the first one, the mood. I mean, it was a difficult summer. The lack of new arrivals, that did hit morale a little bit. The Wesley Fofana situation wasn't ideal either. There's a few players in there that listened as well to what Brendan was saying about needing replacements and certain players not being good enough, that, and they would have listened to that and taken that on board, and that would have knocked confidence. So it was a bit of a mixed morale, I thought, going into the season. Then we had that disastrous 7 games, 1 point from 7 games, and I think that the confidence was really low then. I think the atmosphere wasn't particularly great. Brendan had to build them up again. The break came at a good time for them. The international break in September, they come back, got that win against Forest. And it's all about winning. When you're winning, the mood is so much different. The people are buzzing, people are scoring goals, people are assisting. Maddison's flying, the mood lifts. Then they go into the World Cup, and Maddison's on a high from being called into the World Cup, but with an injury. They come back and the injuries start creeping up again. They're not getting the results again. There's still those unhappy players in the background like Soyuncu, Vestergaard, and things like that. And it suddenly can creep back in. So all the problems you had before, all those cracks, you've just put a bit of polyfiller on and they've just opened up again. So there's still, that's why Brendan's so desperate to have an overhaul of the squad, because he just wants those problems to be gone in terms of certain players that might be pulling a face and not putting it in. I mean, Rodgers intimated that Soyuncu hasn't been putting it in training. When he's been asked why he's not been featuring in Amate, and Nididia being ahead of him, when this is a guy that, a couple of seasons ago was in the Premier League team of the season. I mean, we're talking Atletico Madrid are chasing him now, and one of the top sides in Spain. So, he's got something about him, but Brendan's not having him, and it seems to be a clash of personality now. It seems like it's got to come to an end either January or the end of the season, and that's why I think it's inevitable. I was amazed when I was in the press conference when Brendan said that he was going to be offered a new contract. I was amazed. I thought, how on earth can you move forward? I mean, you never play him. He knows you don't rate him. How on earth can you get anything out of him? I mean, a very strange situation, that.
Yeah, I'm surprised he mentioned that as well, because it was something that he's come about previously and threw him under the bus at times. Remember that against the Tottenham result again, he shouldn't have done this tackle, he shouldn't have done that. And then sometimes you get that with Brendan Rodgers, where a player will be publicly slated, but then also offered the contract. And there was lots of that kind of, again, you've probably seen on Rich and Charlie were both saying there's mixed kind of messaging in that as well.
Well, you say mixed messaging, but Brendan apparently says exactly the same in the dressing room as he says to us. Now, Nigel Pearson wouldn't have done that. Nigel would have gone in and given them both barrels if he felt it, but then he would have come out and defended them in the media, and he would have been prickly and difficult, wouldn't answer questions. And, that's was certainly his tactic during the Great Escape season with Ostrich and all the other waxing and waning and all that lot. That was very entertaining for us, but, we didn't get much out of him. But that was because he was protecting his players, and he was trying to put a bubble around them and create a them and us scenario to get them galvanized. But Brendan is very similar to Nigel in that, he is how you see him. He comes across as, well, he just says it as it is in the press conferences, how he feels. And that's why sometimes it comes across as he's criticising the club, but he's just frustrated sometimes that he hasn't had the resources that he wanted or felt he needed, and the players and that. So when he criticises players to us like that, it's probably misguided, but it's only what he's saying to them as well. But then, when he's coming out and saying it publicly, I think sometimes that's probably the wrong choice, because, and I'm saying that from a perspective of the media, we want people to come out being genuine and honest. But probably in a management way, that's probably not the right thing to do. But then, he comes out and he praises players to the hilt as well. Absolutely praises to the hilt, and builds them up as well when he thinks they need it. So it's only when he thinks they're not putting the shift in and they probably need a kick up the bum rather than an arm round the shoulder, that he does that. But it's with Soyuncu, I think that's backfired.
It seems like it has. And I think one of Rich's second question I was going to bring up later as well is about the development squad. Again, we've seen Will Alves and Casey McAteer feature recently against Milton Keynes.
What a shame for Will, because I thought he was going to be one that you might have seen knocking on the door this season, especially with the injury crisis now. I mean, we're talking before the Gillingham game, and there will be a number of the youngsters in. Sammy Braid will probably be in, Casey McAteer, Lewis Brunt, they'll probably in, and they'll be challenging to start. we asked today about, and I know this is not going out before embargoes, but we asked today about whether those lads will get a chance, and he said, well, yeah, I don't look at age. I look at whether they're going to be good enough, and I need to throw them into these sort of games, because I asked and said, well, is this the ideal game for them to go to Gillingham when it's going to be probably peeing down with rain and difficult, and the fans are going to be on them? And he said, well, let's test the character. Let's see if they've got the character. So I fully expect to see a number of the youngsters being given a little opportunity this season, although he has got his core of players that he calls on game after game after game. And I know we're probably going to get onto injuries in a minute, but and that might be a factor in that. But he will give youngsters opportunities if he trusts them.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Again, I'm hoping so, because it's, when the feeling you have when somebody's from the academy on the pitch, I remember even when Alves get on, it just gave everybody a little bit of a lift that we know this player's been. We've seen him in the under-23s, and we've seen that he's like 17, so he's kind of gone through the under-18s into the under-23s and has looked the best player on the pitch. And just that just awful injury again, it's just so disappointing, because we've seen players not recover from them. I'm hoping that he's young and his mentality is good, that he can, but it's such a shock. And it sent a wave, not just through Leicester sphere, through other people's spheres as well. Like, I remember a Chelsea fan and not a Tottenham fan were messaging me going, what the hell is this as well? So it did go across multiple avenues as well. It
was a terrible tackle, but it was a terrible tackle by a 16-year-old as well. So you've got to bear that in mind. He's a kid as well. He will learn from that. And I hope he feels an incredible amount of remorse, because I haven't seen a tackle that bad for a long, long time. Devastating for Will, though. He's going to be out for the rest of the season, and he's got a long road back. But these days with the science, as long as it isn't too bad, they can rebuild them and get them back. And we've seen players come back from ACLs and been just as good as before. And if it's character building for him, and and it makes him even more determined. If he achieves what everybody thinks he can achieve in the game, then they might look back on it and think, wow, it was just one of those things that built him up, that helped him.
Sounds good. And any other questions you got?
Yeah, so with Brendan Rodgers, obviously, I do feel like a lot of this is fan noise, but how much is the club still fully behind him, or is there starting to be any doubts sort of behind the scenes, or is the board still very much seeing Brendan Rodgers as the man for long term to take Leicester forward?
I think there's always forward planning, so they've always been looking ahead. If things went sour or Brendan left, if he got offered, because there was a lot of chat a while back that the likes of United and that were looking at him and wanted to take him away, so they would have been planning for that then. I mean, I think the top of the list at the time would have been Graham Potter. Obviously that ship sailed now. But I think they liked somebody like that, somebody to carry on that sort of ethos. Saw him as a similar sort of character. But I think they are. But I don't think they'll let it slide too much. I think they'll definitely give him the transfer window, because I think there's a feeling that they sort of understand that they didn't back him the way he wanted to be backed. There's a recognition that squad did need an overhaul, and they couldn't give it to him, and there's a bit of regret about that. I think Top and Brendan do have a close relationship, so I think for now, I think he's going to be okay. But the big factor is the fans. I mean, Top resisted a lot. I mean, when the banners were coming out just before the international break in September. Obviously, he would have noticed that. He would have been aware of that. He would have understood that. And he's always been one that listens to the supporters. So long as it doesn't get to a point where it's a vast majority of the crowd that are calling for a change. And it's still, at the moment, from what I can gauge, still a minority. I mean, I mean, obviously, when they went on that great run, winning 5 out of 8 before the World Cup, all that sort of just disappeared. But it's still in the background. They just go quiet, but they're still not believing in him, despite everything he's achieved at the club. I mean, he has achieved a lot, regardless of whether you think Brendan's the man to take the club forward or not. you've got to recognise that, he has achieved a lot at the club. 2 top 5 finishes. I know people will say the caveat is that, well, they should have finished for champion in the top 4, but that would have been an incredible achievement. But 2 top 5 finishes, 2 European tours, an FA Cup, a Community Shield, another top 10 finish. This is the biggest challenge. And I always knew this was going to be the big challenge for him this season. Because if you look at his career, it's always been in 3-year cycles. And after 3 years, he's moved on or he's been moved on. So he was coming into uncharted territory now. And this is that squad. That's why he wanted the squad changing, because, everything comes to an end. Natural life in football, and it's short. It's the natural life of squads, the natural life of players at clubs and managers. It's short. It's getting shorter, and it needed an overhaul. And he recognised that. So he's in uncharted territory in the fact that, he's got to try and rebuild a squad that he inherited now. And he wants the resources to do it, but the club can't do it at the moment. They just can't give him the resources that he needs.
And I think that's something that obviously with the Fofana money that's kind of hopefully coming in. And again, I'm not, in terms of January, it looks like there's not going to be, it's about 2023 as a whole rather than just January. And they've mentioned again a couple of positions, but do you think it'll be likely that we are going to get at least one signing? Because granted, in the summer, in the January's over, I think I'm reading an article that you put out, and it was literally do players Leicester players sign players in January, and it was just 0-0-0 over the last 3 summers. So
they've never signed a player in January permanently under Brendan. They had Ryan Bennett on loan. That didn't work out too well, but they've never signed a player permanently in January. And if you look back, I mean, there's been a few exceptions in the past, some notable ones, but overall they don't tend to do too much business in January, and that's because they don't see a lot of value in it. Because, as I said before, the players that are available are going to be expensive because clubs don't want to part with them. So you're left them picking up players that are surplus, and sometimes that works great. I mean, look at Robert Huth. They brought him in the Great Escape season, as I mentioned earlier. He was surplus at Stoke for some crazy reason, and what an incredible performer he was for the club. Club legend. Title winner. So it can be done, and I think Brendan made that point as well today. He said, "Look, he went back to, he signed Coutinho in a January transfer window. Some of the players that he signed in January transfer window, he said they are available if you look hard enough, and I think that's what they're trying to do. They're looking hard to see if there's going to be those players that can come in and make a difference, but straight from the off. Not, you want starters. You don't want players that are going to need 6 months to develop, because what's the point in that if you're in a dogfight? You need, and I think the way things are going, the way other clubs are picking up at the moment, and the way Leicester are struggling. Even though I don't think the second half against Fulham and the first half against Liverpool were too bad. I know the defending it was shocking at times, and the finishing was shocking at times, and that was the crucial thing. But I actually thought first half against Liverpool they played quite well. Fulham, they put them under a lot of pressure. Even Fulham fans would say, they had to hang on at the end. There was lots of chances that Leicester just didn't take. But, you've got to do that at this level. You've got to defend properly and take your chances. Otherwise, you will be in trouble. And the way things are going at the moment, unfortunately, I think Leicester might have a few concerns.
And I think rightfully so. I mean, 2 points off the drop at the time of recording as well. And there's a few teams in that position where it could be up or down at the moment. And there is a gap. There is a gap opening up as well, which is unfortunate, where we're not too far. One question I have, somebody that didn't manage to submit a question, but a young fan from Joaquin from South America has asked, well, we sign a lot of players from Europe. Our scouting system in Europe is fantastic. He's looking at them going, there's so many gems in South America, especially, again, his background's from Argentina. And he goes, there's so many gems. Is there a reason why Leicester City haven't gone into South America and looked for these gems in the future?
It's such an interesting one. I've been asked this one quite a few times, and I haven't got an answer for it because I don't understand why they wouldn't have scouts in South America. I mean, it's such a hot pot of talent, and if you can get them over here and get them acclimatized, we've seen how many Brazilians and Argentinians like McAllister at Brighton, and You know, players like that, they've come over and adapted superbly well and become great players. And I'd be really surprised to hear if they didn't have a South American scout out there looking at these players as well. They tend to operate in certain markets. France and Belgium in particular seem to be their markets. I mean, they have dipped in Portugal as well. Spain without much success. Very little in Germany. But
that might be changing as well, because I think they've brought in somebody from Tottenham, haven't they? Who's going to be a German scout.
Yeah, well, that's an area that probably we're going to be looking at. But I think Germany, the Bundesliga, is looking more at the Premier League than the Premier League's looking at the Bundesliga. To be honest, but I just think that there's they look at France and Belgium in particular as countries that develop young talent very well. So there's not a lot of polishing to do when they come over. I mean, look at Val, comes straight in, doesn't he? You know, born and bred in Belgium, polished a little bit in France, comes over and he's straight in. I know, forget Liverpool, but he's performed superbly well. So they trust those markets, but you know, they will be looking around. I mean, obviously they're looking at Scandinavia now as well, and they have got their net cast quite far, but they do tend to trust certain markets more than others.
Yeah, and I think you were mentioning as well, Argentina is obviously one of them, but obviously like Ecuador with Caicedo as well, did perform really well at the World Cups, linked again to a lot of top 6 teams. You've got and so Brighton has seemed to have picked that pocket quite well, and he was mentioning, why haven't Leicester done this? Because there's so many good players from South America.
And there's a great article by my colleague Andy Naylor, who covers Brighton on why they look over there so much and how they've done it, which I recommend people check out as well. It's I think it's something that Leicester really need to look at. Yeah,
and just on that as well, I think we've got one question from our friend over in Korea, Tacticam, who's going to get a couple of question on some of the funds available as well.
Rob, I'm Tactica, who work as a performance analyst from the university, and I'm the big fan of LCFC from Korea. I have 2 questions. The first one is, how much budget is available for team to our winter transfer? And second question is, do you know exactly the specific name of the list who can come to our team, like Jerry, Boga, something?
So I know we touched on it a little bit, but yeah,
there won't be a massive amount. There will be significant funds, I believe. I mean, as I said, the 46 million that they've got from the 2 loans. But as I said, I think they'll prefer to keep that in reserve, some of that in reserve for the summer when they'll have to sell an asset. So I don't know, 20 million, I think, something around there. If they can get 3 players in, perhaps 2, that cost them a bit of money, and perhaps a loan for a centre back, that would probably be the business they'd look to do, unless somebody was sold, unless they had an offer for somebody, and they took that and tried to reinvest it straight away, which I think they've tried to do. The other side of this is obviously the club's been posting losses over the last few years for reasons that we mentioned earlier in terms of their revenue. This next a set of accounts might be pretty brutal as well, that are coming soon. So they've got to bear that in mind as well. The finances are difficult because of COVID. There's still the knock-on from that, and the fact they didn't sell an asset in the particular window. So and that was a change up to their model. So prepare yourselves that there might be a difficult accounts come out, but I think the club aren't too worried about it. I think pressing forward with these projects they have as well. They seem to believe that they've got what they need to move forwards and get the club back on a stable footing. And I think that's a major factor why they didn't invest a lot of money in the last 2 windows. I mean, they never do in January, as I said before, but the last summer, normally they put some money in, and it wasn't until Fofana was sold that they did. So, but moving forward, I still think they want to back the manager, but they've still got to be realistic about the situation as well.
Yeah, and it could be a lot worse in terms of you look at the likes of Wolves spent money, West Ham spent money, and they're still in a similar position to us as well. Yeah, exactly. They spent quite a lot of money, and it's not spending money and being in a bad place is one thing, but spending lots of money to get you out of that and still being in a bad place leaves you even more in a hole.
Yeah, and Everton. I mean, look at the situation at
Yeah.
Everton. How much money have they wasted over the years? I mean, they've been. I mean, I talked about FFP. I mean, how on earth they've not fallen foul of FFP guidelines, Premier League guidelines. I mean, that situate you can. I think it's 105 million over 3 years that you can lose.
COVID, something is COVID loophole, wasn't it?
There was a COVID loophole. I mean, Leicester put down 50 million of theirs because they've obviously lost over 105 million over the last 3 years, but they put 50 million down to COVID. I think Everton put way more than that down to COVID. So it's such a grey area, but I think Leicester are trying to do it the right way. If you know what I mean, they're trying to be honest about it and pragmatic about how they deal with their finances as well. But they're going to try. They're going to try to help Brendan. I mean, a big difference would be if they got the players fit. You know, I mean, I looked at it, and Ricardo Pereira, James Justin, Evans, KDH, Sumari, Maddison, Daka, Pratt. That's a pretty decent starting 11, isn't it? Really. I mean, I suspect 4 or 5 of those would be regular starters now, possibly. Sumari seems to have gone ahead of Ndidi. Daka seems to have gone ahead of Vardy. They're certainly away from home, so perhaps even more. I mean, that's a big loss for any team that in the Premier League to lose that level of player, especially Maddison.
Yeah, definitely agree. And one player that I definitely agree with some of those, and one player that seems to be kind of the opposite, never seems to get injured, but still have some meetings in the team. Ihaenacho, every time he seems to play, Brendan doesn't fancy him. I think it's quite obvious that he doesn't fancy him. Even in the game against Fulham recently, where we needed a couple of changes, it would be a perfect opportunity to bring on Ihaenacho. He brought on Marco Brighton instead. What do you think the future is for Ihaenacho at the club? Because he had that amazing season in 2020. From this time forward, what do you think the future is?
Well, Brendan likes to play 4-3-3. Or variations of 4-3-3, which means one striker, one lone striker. So he likes pace up top. So it's Vardy and Daka. Iheanacho's not that sort of player. Daka's more of a 10, in my opinion. He's more of a second striker. And when he had that fantastic success in the winning season, it was when they switched to a back 3 through circumstance, and they played 2 up top. And Iheanacho played with Vardy, and he played as that second striker, that slightly withdrawn striker. And what a difference that made. He just doesn't seem to fit into the system Brendan wants to play. And the situation at the moment with the lack of centre-backs, it makes it really difficult for him to do it again. We saw it for the last 20 minutes, didn't we, against Fulham. He went to a back 3, 2 up top. Iheanacho was up there. And that's where he's comfortable. You know, when he can just drop into the little pockets, turn. He can play some great passes. He can provide some great assists. And he can score a goal from outside the box as well as inside the box. You know, I like him, but Brendan just can't find a place for him in the team. He's played him this season off the right. He's tried so many players on that right. That's been such a poison chalice of a position, hasn't it, over the years? But he tried him there, and a little bit of success with Daka, but unless he changes to a back 3, I can't see Iheanacho starting a regular run of games.
No, and I think that might be the case going forward, just because of the lack of players we have at the moment, and so it could be something going forward, but we will have to see. And I think we've got one more question from Aaron again. Apologies, for some reason my camera decided to go blurry. I'm not sure why. And just again, one more player from person from Turkey. Somebody we mentioned a lot so far, but again, you can imagine who he's going to talk about in terms of centre backs.
Hi Neil, hi Rob. My question will be about Brendan Rodgers' decisions about our defenders. First, we benched Çağlar Soyuncu. Then we sold Wesley Fofana. Then we bought Woodfels, and we have Amarty. And what Rob is thinking about these decisions, and do we think it was a good idea to sold Wesley Fofana and bench Çağlar Soyuncu when we look the table, Premier League table, especially for the first weeks, and how Rob reacts to that?
Well, Çağlar Soyuncu, I think, is a victim of his own situation in terms of the start of last season. There were so many injuries to centre backs. He had to play something like 24, 26 consecutive games. And their games were coming thick and fast with Europe and everything. The Carabao Cup, he played every game. And it got to the stage where we all thought, he's going to burn out here. He's going to burn out. They were playing, very high standard, very high level. And he was struggling a little bit for form, a little bit for confidence, but there was no room to take him out and give him a breather because there was nobody available. And then sure enough, his hamstring went. So he had an injury that he struggled to get back from. But I think Çağlar's problems stem even more from going back to the Euros when Turkey went in with the best defensive record in qualifying. And I spoke to a number of Turkish journalists about it for an article, and they were saying, look, he's become like the talisman. People are looking to him to be the leader, to guide them, and there's a big weight of responsibility on his shoulders. And they had a terrible tournament, and he come back, and he just didn't seem the same character. He just seemed, his confidence seemed a bit drained. But he played all those games, and he put a shift in. You can't knock him. He stood up. And never moaned at the time. He was out there every game, every week. And then the hamstring went. He had the injury. Come back, couldn't get his place back in the side. Fofana came back from injury, and then Evans sorted out his plantar fasciitis injury, and that was it then. And then slowly, he's just dropped down the order. I don't know. I hinted to, something that I understand may have gone on in the background in terms of Soyuncu and Brendan Rodgers, in terms of perhaps a clash of character, perhaps a lack of understanding. Perhaps perhaps Soyuncu feels like he's been made a scapegoat for performances, and feels aggrieved that midfielders have been played at centre back instead of him. That's not going to help his confidence moving forward. So. It's been an unsavoury type of scenario, really, for me. And because we know he's a decent defender. I mean, and we've got to remember, though, Brendan got the best out of him, because when he first came in the club under Claude Puel, he looked like a player that wanted to win every ball, and you can't. And he was diving in front of strikers and getting turned. I remember Mitrovic doing it to him.
Penalty, wasn't it?
At Fulham. Yeah, anyway, he was just committing himself. It wasn't Mitrovic, was it? But he was just committing himself when he didn't need to. And then Brendan come in, and he just seemed to change. He just seemed to be a bit more level-headed, a little bit more assured. And I thought that was playing alongside Johnny Evans was helping him. And he had that phenomenal season, Premier League Team of the Year. And we thought, wow, what a player. And then Fofana come in. He had that back three of Soyuncu, Evans, and Fofana, and you thought, boy, this is a back three to keep Leicester going for years. But then Fofana, wouldn't turn up for training because he wanted to go to Chelsea, and Soyuncu's had his problems, coming back from the Euros. Evans has had his injury problems, and it's all just fallen apart a little bit. So they need a bit of assurance at the back now. And Wout's come in and done brilliantly for me. Danny Amati, you always sense there's a ricket in him. He'll give the ball away in silly areas sometimes and things like that. But he's tried to step up. But they really need to sort that situation out, really. Vestergaard was a terrible boy. I remember saying to Brendan at the time, he doesn't seem to be the right fit for you. He's not the sort of central defender that loves to press into midfield, and he's athletic and can cover space and turn and chase. He's a. We saw the best of him again. Yeah, and always in the box in the final stages of the games, and he was heading it, kicking it, defending it. He looked fantastic then. That's the sort of defender he is. Back to the wall. I'll head it. I'll defend. A bit like Rob Oof, to be honest. But Leicester play a different style now. They like play high up the pitch, like to press. They like to have athletic defenders. And that's not Yannick, so he's unfortunate in terms of that as well. So, Yeah, it's all been very strange, but they need to rectify that. They brought in the wrong players.
Yep, and hopefully this is the summer again. It was supposed to be last summer, but again, I don't think there was a lot of people that came in for our players, and they were hoping that there was going to be as well, and it just never come to fruition. Now they're obviously leaving a lot of the players you were mentioning: Ndidi, Amate, Evans on last year the contract, Perez, Mendy, it's another one, Dennis Pratt, Youri Tielemans. There's quite a few, and one that I've got down because we mentioned a lot of them. There's been a lot of links, obviously left backs for the future, with one player that's been continuing to play game in, game out, and has looked rock solid for about a year or so. Timothy Castagne. Do you think he's still got a future at the club? Because there's so many players, and there's so many players in them positions in terms of fullback. And there was a time I remember where Ricardo was injured, James Justin was playing out of his skin, and we were wondering, with Castagne playing out of his skin, with James Justin, and with Luke Thomas there, who would get in the team? And now we're bringing another left back. Granted, I know he prefers to play on the right and he can play either side. What do you think the future is about Leicester and Castagne?
Castagne is Mr. Reliable. You could play him, on the right of the back three, play him on the right, play him on the left. I mean, they've tried him on the right of midfield as well. He'll just put in a shift for you. He's the sort of guy you've got to keep in your squad. He can do so much for you, and he's durable. I mean, how many batterings has he taken in his career? How many bones is he breaking? His eye sockets and all sorts, shoulders popping out, and he's just had it popped in and carried on playing. And he's a battler. I hope Leicester fans appreciate him. To be honest, I think he's been a great signing, Castagne. He's there. You can always rely on him. Always rely on him. Even when he's coming back from an injury and he's not up to speed, he'll still give his all. And I think he's a quality sign, and I think he's the sort of player that Brendan and Leicester would like to keep at the club for a very long time, and I hope they do.
I'm hoping so as well. Again, considering that we sold Ben Chil for double and bought him in for half, and he's just looked fantastic in that period of time as well.
Remember his debut at West Brom, and he popped up with a goal. I mean, that was that was the thing. So we that round that time, we thought that we had it all. As I said, Evan, Fofana, and the Castagne. Ben Chilwell had gone, but James Justin had switched over and looked a will beat. And you thought, they've got this absolutely spot on. Recruitment's been absolutely top notch, but it just hasn't been when it's been really needed in the last couple of windows.
Yeah, it really has. And I'm hoping, again, coming into this year in the January and going forward as well, that'll be the case. And as you're mentioning, there's been a lot of profile of younger players because that's where Leicester tend to thrive over the years. However, with the older crop kind of getting on and some of them being past their peak, is it time that we look at the kind of profile of player that is built more of that leadership? And is that something they're going to look at? Because with the likes of Johnny Evans, as good as he is, just looks like he's injured pretty much constantly for the last 2 years now. Is that a kind of profile that we need in terms of a more experienced profile?
Experience, but to a level. I think Johnny will probably admit if he gets, he was going to get another year. I think he'll get another year, and I think he'll sign it. Vards has got another year, but I think they're both realistic about the role they've got to play in the squad now. It's going to be very much a supporting role, as we've seen previously from Christian Fuchs, who's just announced his retirement. Best of luck to him. The older statesman type players that will give you everything when they're required, and they will put a shift in. But their other role is in the dressing room, away from the games. On the training field, setting an example, guiding the others. Vards has got a massive role to play in that over the next couple of years. Patson Daka, we all hope he will come to the fore. I think they'll bring in another striker as well eventually. They'll need to, I think, to provide competition. But I think they know that the end's not that far away now, and what their role will be. And I think the club will want to bring in a centre back or two over the next couple of windows, and possibly a striker next summer as well, just to add that element of competition as well, but also to alleviate the pressure on those guys. I mean, with Patson, thankfully Patson's injury is not that bad now. He should be back soon. It was only like a spasm in his hamstring. So, Vards won't have to play every game because they're coming thick and fast, aren't they? But I think they would like to bring in a bit of experience as well.
I'm hoping so as well. And just one player, because we've touched on left backs, right backs, right wings, not touched on left wing that much, but one player that we haven't mentioned, again, a player that we didn't expect to play that much probably coming into the season, Danny Ward. Do you think he's going to be the number one going forward? Because there's been some concerns. We've also seen some great performances by him, and great one thing in particular that Kasper didn't do as much. He comes for the ball and collects it, but is he the long-term number one going forward?
I think it remains to be seen. I think he was deserving of his chance, although I think the club would have liked to have brought in another goalkeeper to challenge him properly. But then the finances dictate they can only bring in Alex Smithies. So Danny got his opportunity, and that the feeling was that he was deserving of that. You know, it took 4 years for him to get his Premier League debut for Leicester, which was ridiculous, but that was all down to the Kasper Schmeichel. But you're right, he does come, but the players don't seem to be used to it because he's coming and calling, and they're still trying to defend situations. We saw it at the start of the season at Brighton. I remember Wilfred Ndidi heading when it was comfortable catch for him. We saw it twice at Liverpool, pretty much. Because there was an incident with Amate as well as the Wout Vaar's first own goal. You know, they've got to trust him. They've got to put their faith in him. He can see everything. Listen to him. I actually felt for Danny to start with him because, he was conceding a lot of goals, but the defence was so wide open. I mean, they were ridiculously so. He had to face so many one-on-ones, and he pulled off some decent saves, and he has done in the last 3 games as well. And I've talked about the chances we missed, but he also has pulled off some decent saves as well. But whether they think he's the right guy going forwards, Kasper Schmeichel's a big pair of gloves to fill after all the time at the club, 11 years. He's a very different character off the field to Kasper. He's a little bit more light-hearted, a little bit more relaxed. No less dedicated, but he's a different sort of character. But so we'll have to judge it over the rest of the season. I don't think they'll bring another. I know they've been linked with Dubravka at Newcastle, and they've been linked with him before. But I'll be surprised if they do a goalkeeper in January.
Especially with 4 keepers, it seems kind of overkill at this point.
Yeah, and they've got high hopes for Jacob as well, Slawik, the Polish lad. I can never pronounce that. They've got high hopes for him. Brendan really likes him. So, I mean, he's not had a great loan at Fleetwood at the moment, but they've got hopes that eventually he can step up and be number one.
Sounds good. And again, I think in the academy, there's a lot of great goalkeeping talent specifically as well. Ben Grist was one, I think. Odunzi was another one. So there's really good goalkeepers there as well, and some of them are huge as well. I think Odunzi's like 6'8". He's like unbelievably tall.
Yeah, he's a big shot stopper. Whether he can sort his feet out and be that sort of, because we can see with Danny and we saw it with Kasper certainly. That they like to play it, ping it wide. Get the ball off the centre backs when they're under pressure and play out the back. Whether he can develop that part of his game, time will tell. I think he needs to take it up another level, but he's certainly a physical presence.
Yeah, definitely is. And I don't know if you have any other questions. I know you missed a part of it, but any other questions at all?
Whilst we're on the topic of goalkeepers, and I don't know if it's been mentioned whilst I wasn't here, but Daniel Iversen, is there any possibility that he could be looked at as the long-term number one?
He's got a chance. I'm not sure though. He's definitely an asset because he's a very, very good goalkeeper, and we've seen it on the few games that he's stepped in as number one for the Carabao Cup games. Saving penalties. Now he's a shot stopper, and he had a wonderful season at Preston. But he's a bankable asset as well. So remember, I talked about they might have to sell to buy in January to generate the funds. He might be one of those assets that they can look to sell on and get some decent money for if they want to reinvest. He's got an opportunity, but it's difficult to say because I think Danny's going to be the number one for the foreseeable future, unless he has a run of form that is so bad that Brendan has no choice. I think he'll want to keep faith with him, and they might then look at that situation in the summer. But I don't. It's a difficult one to predict with Danny. Danny Iversen, because you know, I like him. He's not great with his feet again, as I just mentioned, but a wonderful goalkeeper, shot stopper, a bit like Casper in that sense, you know. But he's also the one that will come out and claim but high balls and stuff like that. So, you know, it's hard to predict what's going to happen for Iversen.
Yeah, hopefully again he'll get more opportunities, especially even at Gillingham. Again, I think Danny Ward will start, but I'm hoping at Gillingham he'll have a start as well. One player I'm going to get into again, he's been linked for quite a while now, but again, it's one of the players that is on the radar. Ounahi from Morocco, obviously fantastic World Cup, one of the stars of the World Cup, linked with Leicester on and off here and there, one that won't go away. So I had to ask you, Rob, what is the story behind Ounahi? Because it's one that just won't shake, and also one that just continues to go on and on.
Another one that's probably on the radar. To be honest, he is somebody I've heard mentioned internally, but again, it's whether, I mean, they're talking sort of 20 million euro. I mean, I can't see that happening in this window. Whether they can get him on a loan with a view to a permanent in the summer, that would be an interesting option. But problem for Leicester is everybody knows they need players, and everybody knows they've got a little bit of money. So it's whether, you know, the asking price is how inflated they're becoming. I mean, you know, each of the players that they've been linked with, they're talking something like 20 million pounds or 20 million euro for those. You know, Leicester haven't got that sort of money to spend on 3 or 4 players at the moment, and I don't think they will. I think they'll try and bring in a couple for around 20-25 million if they can, and then try and get a loan for a centre back if they can. They might even look for loans in other areas with a view to buy, just so they can spread the money over the course of 2 windows. So it's going to be difficult, but yeah, I'm certain they're looking at him. But I'm certain a lot of clubs will be looking at him after the World Cup.
Yeah, there'll be quite a few. And any 4 questions before we finish up?
No, I think, well, I've asked everything I've got written down, so I can't think of anything else.
But yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for coming on again. Really appreciate you and just taking the time out, considering we have a page and a half worth of questions and taking people's questions. I really appreciate that. Again, I'll leave all your links in the description, but tell the people where they can find you.
We're at The Athletic. It's an app and a website. You can find us all there. We did a lot during the World Cup, but we also cover in depth that you know, all the Premier League clubs and a lot of the Championship clubs as well, and grassroots and all the big issues in the game. So you can find us at The Athletic app.
Fantastic. And you find Rob's Twitter below. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you've enjoyed this one. Again, if you like, subscribe, all that good stuff, make sure you follow Ant's channel. We'll see everybody in the next video. So goodbye.